What's up, Internet? Welcome to Mo's Garage. In today's video, we're replacing the alternator on this 2005 Nissan Pathfinder. Now, while I'll be replacing the alternator on this 2005 Pathfinder, the process is going to be the same on a similar Frontier and Xterra. As you can see right here, we have that same VQ40 motor. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. Now, before you just go out and replace the alternator, it's important to know that it's actually faulty. So what you want to do is with the engine running, you want to get a voltage reading. You want to make sure that that reading is around 14 volts. As you can see right here, mine's at around 12.25, and that's because I don't have the engine running. Now, the reason I'm replacing the alternator here is because it's making a really obnoxious noise when it's running. So I'd rather replace it now before it leaves the owner stranded on the side of the road. Now, since the alternator is part of the electrical system on the vehicle, before we get started, we want to go ahead and remove the negative cable of the battery. That way there's no accidental shorts while we're working on the alternator. All right, guys, so the first thing we want to do to remove the alternator is to remove the Serpentine Belt. And in order to get access to it, we have to remove the air intake. First things first is we have two 10mm bolts up here. Then we can go ahead and pop this guy off. Alright guys, so then we're going to have two 10mm bolts, one here, and there should be another one here, but this one's missing, so I'm just going to remove this one. Alright, now I'm going to loosen the 8mm bolts that hold these hose clamps in. Then we can go ahead and loosen this hose clamp here. Remove the hose. And then we should be able to remove this air intake. Set that up there. Okay, so with the air intake out of the way, we have plenty of room in here to remove the Serpentine Belt. As you can see right here, here's the tensioner pulley, and it has a 3/8. So I'm going to use my ratcheting wrench to stick this guy in here, pull to the left. And then I can pull the Serpentine Belt off with the other hand. Alright, just like that. Alright, now to access the alternator, we do need to come in through the wheel well. As you can see, I've already removed the tire, but we need to remove this fender liner, which is held by a bunch of push pins and some Phillips head screws. It looks like some push pins are already missing, so I'm going to go ahead and remove this so we can actually get to the alternator. Alright guys, now that we have the fender liner removed, we can actually see the alternator. As you can see, this is the front right here, and we have two bolts that we need to remove. It looks like the bottom one is going to be a 12mm and the top one is going to be a 14mm. Then over here on the back side, it looks like there's a harness running across the back of the alternator with two push pins. We're going to have to remove those. Probably end up using a pry bar or something like that. Then there's this little connector here, as well as the charging cable up here. We're gonna have to loosen those up. And once we have all those disconnected and the alternator bolts removed, we should be able to just pull this thing out. Alright guys, so the first thing I'm gonna try to do is remove the harness from the back of the alternator. And I'm just gonna use a pry bar to remove it from the alternator. Alright, so it looks like I got one. Alright, cool. Looks like we got the second one as well. Alright, so I'm going to go down here and unclip the alternator harness. Alright guys, so now I'm going to go ahead and remove the charging cable. And in order to do so, you got to pop back this grommet. Alright, now with the charging cable exposed, I'm going to go ahead and try to remove it. I believe this is a 12mm. Alright, and with this broken loose, I'm just going to go ahead and remove it the rest of the way by hand. Alright, so now with the electrical connections unplugged from the alternator, it's time to remove the two mounting bolts, and I'm going to start off with the bottom 12mm bolt. Alright guys, so I'm not sure how well you guys can see it, but the next bolt we're going to remove is this guy right here, and that's going to be a 14mm. Alright, and so with that removed, let's go ahead and remove the alternator. Alright guys, so now that we have the alternator out, it's always best practice to make sure that the alternator that you removed is the same as the new one you have. So as you can see right here on the right, we have the old one, and then right here on the left, we have the new one. The mounting holes seem to be about the same. Then if we flip it on its side, you can see right here that the charging post and the connector are both on the same spot, and they're both 3 pins. And then on the back side, you have those 2 mounting holes for the wiring harness on the same spot. So with that, it's time to go ahead and throw this thing on the Pathfinder. Alright, so now that I have the 12mm just hand tight, I'm going to see if I can clock the alternator to the correct position and stick that 14mm bolt. Alright guys, so now that I have the 14mm tightened up, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the 12mm. Again, I'm sure there's a torque spec for these things, but I'm just tightening them up by hand. Alright, now let's put this coolant hose back. Alright, with the front buttoned up, let's go ahead and wire up the alternator. Go ahead and put in our post. Alright, then we can go ahead and put the nut on. Careful not to drop it. Alright, once you have it nice and snug, we can go ahead and put that rubber boot back on. Make sure that this guy goes on, because otherwise you'll have a short. And also be careful not to over tighten that bolt, because that is just a stud on the alternator. Now we can go ahead and plug in the alternator. Giving it a nice little tug just because I didn't hear a click, but it looks like it's nice and secured in there. Alright, now we just have to go ahead and plug in this harness back into the alternator. Alright guys, now that we have the alternator installed, it's time to go ahead and put back the Serpentine Belt. It's kind of hard to show you guys on camera because it's so tight, but I'm going to go ahead and put a picture on screen of how you should route the Serpentine Belt. And then I'm also going to go ahead and install the air intake. Alright guys, so I have the Serpentine Belt back on, and I have the air intake back on, as well as everything connected to it, like this PVC hose. I have the negative terminal of the battery reconnected. I still have the wheel off and the fender lining off, but that's because the next thing we got to do is we have to test the alternator. So with that, I'm going to need to test the voltage, make sure that it's at least 14 volts or higher when the engine is running. So let's go ahead and do that. All right guys, so like I mentioned previously, the last thing we need to do is make sure that the alternator is running at 14 volts or higher. So here I have the engine running, and let's go ahead and get that voltage test. Alright, so as you can see right here, we're at 14.4 volts. So that means the alternator is running, and this repair was a success. Alright guys, so there you have it. We have successfully replaced the alternator on this 2005 Nissan Pathfinder. And as I mentioned previously, the process is the same for Xterras and Frontiers with that same VQ40 motor. Overall, the process wasn't too difficult. It does require some patience, but other than that, it's not difficult at all. So with all that out of the way, thank you guys so much for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.